The wind moved softly through the dry grass, whispering secrets of the old frontier. The sun had begun to set behind the rugged hills of Arizona Territory, painting the sky in crimson and gold. Inside a small wooden ranch house stood a man named Eli Cooper, a widowed rancher who had spent the last 7 years building a quiet life for himself and his 2 daughters. The sound of the land, the rustle of cattle, the creak of the barn door, the soft neigh of horses was all he needed to feel peace. But peace is a fragile thing on the frontier. And that evening, as the wind turned colder, Eli's life was about to change forever. The story begins slow, the kind of quiet you only find after years of heartbreak. Eli had buried his wife under the cottonwood tree by the creek, promising her he'd raise their girls right. He kept that promise. Every morning he'd wake before dawn, light the stove, and make biscuits while his girls, Abby, 16, and Lila, 12, fed the chickens. The ranch might have been small, but it was honest work. And that honesty was all Eli ever asked for. He never went into town unless he had to. The world out there, men with whiskey breath, guns that spoke louder than truth, had taken enough from him already. But that evening, something strange happened. The girls had gone riding along the ridge to gather stray calves before the storm rolled in. Eli was sharpening his old hunting knife on the porch when he heard the sound of horses galloping fast, too fast. Then came the shouting. "Papa, open the door!" Abby's voice cracked with fear. Eli ran out, heart thundering. The 2 girls came riding down the slope, their horses slick with sweat. Between them, slumped, bleeding, barely conscious, was a young Apache woman. The sight froze Eli in place. Her skin was pale from blood loss, her hair tangled with dust. An arrow snapped off near her shoulder. Abby's eyes were wild. "Pa, she's hurt bad. We couldn't just leave her there." For a long moment, Eli said nothing. The world around him seemed to hold its breath. The girl's breathing was shallow, each gasp scraping like gravel in her throat. Eli looked toward the horizon, the mountains, the deepening dusk, the storm building behind it. His mind raced. Helping an Apache woman could mean trouble. Men in town didn't forgive such kindness. But as he looked into his daughter's tearful eyes, he knew the choice was already made. "Bring her in," he said quietly. Inside the cabin, the smell of blood mixed with firewood and storm air. Eli worked with steady hands, cutting away the torn cloth, cleaning the wound with whiskey, his jaw tight with focus. The woman didn't cry out. She just stared at him, eyes fierce despite the pain, like a wolf cornered but unbroken. When Eli finally pulled the arrowhead free, she fainted. Abby and Lila stood close, clutching each other. "Who is she, Pa?" Lila whispered. "I don't know," he said softly. "But she's under our roof now. That makes her our responsibility." Outside, thunder rolled like distant gunfire. That night, Eli sat by the fire while the woman lay wrapped in his late wife's quilt. He thought of the risks, the soldiers at Fort Lowell, the ranchers who hated the Apache, the bounty hunters who'd shoot first and ask later. But as he looked at his daughters, sleeping near the fire with worry still on their faces, he realized something. His peace had already ended. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. The next morning, Eli was up before dawn. The woman was awake, her dark eyes following him. She didn't speak English, but when he offered her water, she accepted with a slight nod. Her name, as he would later learn, was Nayeli, which meant "I love you" in her tongue. Days passed. Nayeli began to heal, and with every sunrise, she became less a stranger and more a shadow woven into their lives. She helped Lila gather water, helped Abby mend clothes, even fed the horses when she could. Eli noticed how quietly she moved, how she looked at the land with a kind of reverence, like every breeze carried a story only she could understand. But whispers travel fast on the frontier. A trader riding by saw her once and didn't like what he saw. By the time he reached town, rumors had begun to spread. Eli Cooper's harboring an Apache woman. That kind of talk could turn neighbors into enemies. A few nights later, as Eli sat carving wood by the fire, Abby asked, "Pa, what happens if the men from town find out?" Eli didn't answer right away. He looked at Nayeli, sitting silently near the window. her profile outlined by moonlight. "Then," he said slowly, "we find out what kind of people we really are." Outside, a wolf howled across the hills. Inside, the silence deepened, not the peaceful kind this time, but the heavy kind that comes before everything changes. The next morning brought strangers to the ranch, 2 men on horseback, dust rising behind them. They wore pistols low and faces hard. One of them called out, "Morning, Cooper. Heard you've been keeping company with the enemy." Eli stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. "Don't believe everything you hear," he said calmly. The men exchanged a look. "You tell your girls to stay clear of savages," one sneered. "Ain't safe mixing blood with dirt." Before Eli could reply, Nayeli appeared behind him, standing tall, defiant. Her gaze locked on the men like a hawk's. Something in that silence made even the wind stop moving. The riders shifted nervously, spat in the dust, and turned away. But Eli knew they'd be back, with more men and more hate. That night, while his daughters slept, Eli sat alone on the porch, rifle across his knees. The stars stretched wide over the desert, cold and endless. He thought of his wife, of the life he'd built, of the peace that was now gone. Yet deep down, something else stirred, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Maybe this was what the frontier demanded, not just survival, but courage. He glanced through the cabin window, where Nayeli sat quietly brushing Lila's hair, and Abby laughed softly beside them. For a brief, fleeting moment, it looked like family, and that scared Eli more than any bullet could, because now he had something to lose again. As the wind picked up and thunder growled over the ridges, Eli whispered to himself, "This ain't over yet." And somewhere beyond those dark hills, unseen eyes watched the Cooper ranch, waiting for dawn.